The NFL playoffs just about to get started, but in fantasy world, well, most fantasy worlds, it's all over.
It's done.
All over. Welcome into the Sporting News Studios for Ram Fantasy Update. I'm Tom Vandervoort with Matt Latosky of Sporting News Fantasy Source. So let's take a look back.
Right.
Take a look back at the season. And if I were to say to you, Matt, who are the two biggest studs this year? Biggest eye-opening studs? What would you say?
Well, you know, there's always a different way to look at that term. You could just say Arian Foster. You could just say Adrian Peterson, who we'll talk about in a second.
Right.
But I like to kind of look at relative to draft value and relative to expectations. To me, that's a pair of teammates, the Washington Redskins, Robert Griffin III and Alfred Morris. These are two guys who performed at starter levels at their positions. Griffin, one of the top 3 quarterbacks in fantasy. Alfred Morris, definitely in the top 10 of running backs. I don't think people necessarily expected that, certainly not from Morris. He was a guy that we all looked at and said, Mike Shanahan, he rotates his backs, he'll never keep the job. He kept the job, he flourished. Going into next season, people might be skeptical of both. Griffin's going to have the Cam Newton stigma. Can he do it again?
Right.
And, you know, Cam Newton we saw struggle at the beginning of this year. I think he can, but that's for another time to discuss.
Right.
Morris, though, I really think can do it again. A lot of his offense is predicated off that whole spread that they run. The league might catch up with that, but he's just a good runner. He's a powerful runner, hits the holes hard. I like him going forward next year, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes the first guy miss and then picks up the tough yards, too. Now, how about on the dud side of the equation, performing below expectations?
Yeah, we can go a lot of different ways with that. There's been a lot of duds this year, as there is every year. But guys I like to look at those early round guys who didn't live up. And I think we talked about Cam Newton. You know, he's going to finish as a top 5 fantasy player this year, so it seems weird to call him a dud.
Right.
But because he was so slow out of the gates, inconsistent, I think people are going to be leery of him next year. I think Matthew Stafford's the same way. Had some huge games, had some bad games, and those were quarterbacks drafted in the top 15 to 20 picks in almost every draft, and I think they let you down ultimately. You look at running backs, you had the injury-prone guys, Ryan Matthews, Darren McFadden, DeMarco Murray.
Right.
And even you could throw Jones-Drew in there. We were scared of them, and it turned out to be justified.
Right.
So those guys let you down. And the other two guys who had good years, but I still think relative to draft position, the tight ends, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah.
Good years are going to be among the top tight ends, but they weren't as good as last year. They're going to fall in drafts too.
Okay, now finally, let me ask you this. As far as lessons out of the season and maybe things you can carry into next year, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the biggest thing we learned this year is never doubt Adrian Peterson and never doubt Peyton Manning. These are two guys going into every draft. No one really knew what to do with them. Where do they go? How healthy are they going to be? Can they last all season? They didn't just last all season. You know, Adrian Peterson looks like he's going to be rewriting record books, you know, all the way through. Peyton Manning, phenomenal comeback season, made big-time fantasy relevant, players out of Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker.
Right.
These are two guys, regardless of age, regardless of injury history. You just got to put all the chips on the table with these guys at this point.
All right, very good. That's Matt Latosky. I'm Tom Vandervoort. Good working with you and your crew this season, Matt.
Well, it was good working with you.
All right, we look forward to being back here next year. That's going to do it for Ram Fantasy Update. We'll see you next time.